Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist, Learn Languages, Make a Difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today we're here to talk about a crucial question, one of the most misleading labels you're likely to encounter in linguistics and language learning, so-called native speaker. In this video, I will explain what a native speaker is supposed to be, why is this fallacious, the historical origins and ideological implications of this label, and how we can resist by providing alternatives to it. Stay tuned. So what is a native speaker? Well, strictly speaking, is someone who was born into the language in question, but more broadly, we can understand a native speaker as someone who spoke the language in question since earliest childhood. And conversely, a non-native speaker is someone who learned that language at a later stage in life. Most people who embrace this binary between native and non-native speakers also subscribe to the idea that sounding, speaking like, and even looking like a so-called native speaker is somehow the ultimate aspiration, the ultimate goal and model of competence for language learning and teaching. And conversely, they also subscribe to the idea that non-native speakers are somehow deviant or inferior to native speakers. But native speakers do not exist in the real world. The idea of native speaker is a Platonic idea, is a decontextualized idealization, is an abstraction, or as Chomsky put it, the native speaker is the ideal speaker-listener in the completely homogeneous speech community. The native versus non-native distinction is not objective, and as such, it cannot be empirically verified. There is nothing native about speaking a language other than the fact that we are biologically endowed with the ability to speak any language. Languages are not biological entities, but rather they are socio-cultural constructs, our mastery of which ebbs and flows throughout our life depending on a complex matrix of circumstances. So rather than assuming that native speaker is a valid category and that it designates the epitome of competence in language learning and teaching, we need to analyze the historical origins and political motivations behind native-speakerism as an ideology that is socially and discursively constructed and is reproduced in everyday interactions, thus establishing itself as the hegemonic lenses through which we analyze language use. Abstract, idealized notions of native and non-native speakers do not fall from the sky, and they do not operate in a vacuum either. Rather, they are constructed over time through the discursive practices of individuals and institutions. And we can understand this from two complementary angles: nationalism/colonialism and performativity. The whole idea of native and non-native speakers dates back to the 17th and 18th century emergence of nation-states as political, ethnic, linguistic, and geographical units of societal organization. During this period, citizens were legitimized and recognized through certain cultural and ethno-linguistic characteristics that they had in common and that came to be emblematic of the nation, whereas those who didn't conform came to be marginalized. Simultaneously, these countries were positioned to be ethnically and linguistically superior to their colonies. And the ensemble of these two forces is what we call nationalism/colonialism governmentality, which is manifested through a number of practices, as I already instantiated through my video on why flags do not represent languages. The process of legitimizing native speakers often mobilizes the triad language, ethnicity, and nationality, though it can also go beyond this into economic and educational factors. For example, suppose that you want to learn English and you go to italki and you need to choose between, say, 3 teachers. One that comes from New Zealand, another one that comes from the US, and a further one from the UK. Which one would you rather choose? And the same, for instance, could be said of Portuguese. If you want to learn Portuguese on italki and you have the choice between choosing a teacher from Angola, another one from Brazil, and another one from Portugal, which one would you rather choose? So if you chose the UK or the US in the first case and Portugal or Brazil in the second case, that just goes to show you the extent to which this nationalism/colonialism, governmentality, is internalized in today's society. The ideological fallacy of native speaker is entangled with notions of ethnicity, nationality, accent, and looks, all of which are completely irrelevant to the language proficiency, expertise, and ability of a person in the language in question. And the second factor is what Judith Butler calls performativity, i.e., how the whole distinction between native and non-native speaker gains its social and cultural currency through its being repeated and cited in everyday interactions. And this performativity can take place explicitly or implicitly. Explicitly, for instance, when you read a job ad that says the successful candidate should have native or near native proficiency in, say, French, as if nativeness were a guarantee of someone's proficiency in that language, which is a myth I've already debunked in another video in this channel. Implicitly, it happens, for instance, when we ask a person of color, well, how come you speak Spanish or English that well? As if proficiency in Spanish or English were the province of a certain skin color. That is why actually in the literature some authors have referred to native-speakerism as a neo-racist ideology. So in conclusion, individuals are not native and non-native speakers per se, but rather they are native or non-native speakered over time through different institutional mechanisms, individual performances, and social negotiations. So how can we resist the label native and non-native speakers and embrace alternatives to it? Well, the first step is the use of inverted commas to signify that you're not taking the ideas of native speaker and non-native speaker to be objective realities that can be empirically verified, but rather you're using those labels for lack of a better term. And what is a better word? You can use L1 speaker instead of native speaker. So for instance, instead of saying Spanish native speaker, you can say L1 Spanish speaker, meaning a speaker whose first language is Spanish. Now, is this unproblematic? Not at all. There are also problems with this label because someone can grow up speaking more than one language simultaneously. But still, it's preferable to the label native speaker because unlike the latter, it doesn't include associations to any given ethnicity, nationality, or race. In addition to this, you can engage in a number of practices that run counter the native speaker paradigm. So, for instance, you can engage in translanguaging or in the use of language in a way that it doesn't affiliate with a single nation, state, or ethnicity. Finally, you can also engage in practices of language that do not necessarily abide by what is traditionally considered native or proficient or fluent, that are more like uses of language that are considered broke language or deviant language, and in that way you create new subject positions and reflect a linguistic heterogeneity that does not necessarily conform to monolingualist and native speaker like expectations. So I hope I have put this entire native speaker ideological fallacy to rest and provided you with ways in which you can resist this label and embrace alternatives. Thanks for watching. Please share this video with someone who needs to hear what I said. And as always, thanks for watching.